So in the last session, we looked at the numbers, the beta coefficients, the tiers, the threshold, the data that builds this kind of pastoral care map. And maybe that's helpful for you already. And that tells us the kind of the what. But now I want to look at the why, the story of what's happening underneath for people. And so in this section, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be listening to the stories of the 17 people that we asked to interview in this, or that I asked to interview in this study, and to talk about their own spiritual lives in their words. And as we do that, we'll see that 5 different themes were constructed out of this data. And these are 5 consistent patterns that appeared again and again across all the interviews in different voices and different lives. And so I've given each theme a name. It's not a technical name, it's a human name because they are human experiences. And, it's a helpful way for us to think about this. And here they are. These are the 5 themes from the interview. Theme 1 is that the goal is the Christ-like self. Theme 2 is that we live in the CRCA within a gilded cage. Theme 3 is intentional attention. Theme 4 is the environment. Theme 5 is years, not months. Now, we're going to spend time on each of these, and what I'm trying to do here is not just so that you understand this intellectually, but that we recognize these stories in the people we care for so that we can understand them and maybe even recognize some of these themes show up in our own lives. The first theme then is the Christ-like self. So this is the goal. So the participants, a lot of them recoiled at the idea that our spiritual walk is about us finding our authentic self. Instead, we are pursuing the Christ-like self. We saw that in other places, but this also showed up in the interviews a lot as well. One of the participants, let's call him Bob, when I asked the question about the authentic self, he stopped me in my tracks and he said, who decides what is authentic? How do I work that out? So he's talking about something that is real. There's this cultural message that spiritual growth means us being our authentic self, but it's not. It's about being more and more like Christ. We talked about the theology of that, the biblical view of that, and this is something that our people hold on to as well. Our spiritually healthy people understand that our goal is the Christ-like self. Now, this might be something that your congregation members are struggling with, even if they're not putting it into those words. How do I know what I should be aiming for? Well, Reformed Spiritual Health says you're aiming for Christ. The Christian answer is you're looking to become like Jesus. Now, one of the participants said that as they become more and more like Christ, they themselves change. This is Amy, it's not her real name. She said, we should not be the same one day of our lives and the next day, as we go. So a specific quote says, we should not be the same the day our lives end as the day we said yes to Jesus. So that's the kind of vision. It's to grow, to change over time. Not so much about obeying the rules, but about genuine transformation. And the goal is transformation into Christ, not kind of a niceness, the Christian niceness that we have, but actually into the character of Jesus. Louise captures the tension of this, though. She says, when you can't believe it emotionally, you have to choose to believe it. She was describing this ongoing work of faith, the gap between what you know in your head to be true and what you feel to be true. So the Christ-like self is something that is to be worked out, pursued with fear and trembling over a lifetime. And the thing that I kept hearing across the interviews was something like this, is that the character that you are pursuing, the character of Christ within the own personality that you have, that your true self, if you like, your truest self is Christ within you. So when you grow, you're not losing your personality. Your personality is being redeemed by the Christ-like version of that. Your particular way of being human is being purified and shaped by the character of Jesus. So you are in fact becoming more and more yourself the more you pursue Christ. You have your own personality, but in the character of Christ. That's your truest, most authentic version. Now, the problem is, and this is the second theme, is that there is a force working against us for pursuing our Christ-like self. And that is the gilded cage of the CRCA. Now, every participant touched on this in some form. Now, I've called it the gilded cage because of something that one of the participants says. She actually used the phrase herself. The cage is made of gold. So the cage is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's beautiful. And the cage is good doctrine, Bible knowledge, good Reformed theology. It is a heritage that is worth having. But there is a gap. There is a gap between the head and the heart. There is this 30 centimeter gap between knowing and living, between believing as a kind of intellectual proposition and trusting as a way of life. So one participant, Liv, said it plainly. She said, head knowledge does not equal heart change. George put it differently. He says, you can know it all without actually believing it in a practical sense. Bob says that the heart is sometimes takes second billing. There's 30 centimeters of gap. It's roughly the distance between your head and your heart. And that 30 centimeter gap is for many CRCA members the central terrain of the spiritual struggle, if you like. It is the place that that stifles our spiritual growth. So the cage is made of gold. Our good theology and our pure doctrine and our good teaching are golden things. They're really wonderful, but they do hold us back in a way. Now, this I want you to sit with this for a moment, because the very culture within the CRCA is one of the things that stifles experiential growth, experiential spirituality, actually experiencing the relationship with God. These are some of the ways people described it. Head knowledge doesn't always equal heart change. You can know it without believing it in a practical sense. The heart sometimes takes second billing. The point is that more doctrine is not always what someone needs. Sometimes the person sitting in front of you knows more theology than you do, and more theology certainly than they can live out. And often they don't need more content, they need help crossing the gap from the head into the heart. Now, I want to say this pretty carefully because I recognize that I'm probably stepping on a whole bunch of different toes. And that is that the cage is made out of gold. So the answer is not less scripture or less doctrine or less reformed thinking. Gold is a precious thing. But the answer is that the Spirit needs to work through the Word to result in change. And that is something we can feel and experience. Hebrews 4:2 says that the message the people heard didn't benefit them because it wasn't mixed with faith in the hearers. James tells us to be doers of the word, not just hearers. Ezekiel 36:26 talks about God giving us taking away the heart of stone and giving us a heart of flesh, a heart that is driven by the Spirit. It is the Word and the Spirit working together that kind of unlocks the cage. And I think as we care for people, that is how we can facilitate that to happen. The reality is that because we are in a place that values doctrine so highly, it is that very value that anything that smacks of emotion gets immediately stifled, that can genuinely stop people from pursuing their Christ-like self. People then fix this or attempt to fix this in one of two different ways, and that's theme 3 and 4. So theme 3 is to pay attention to God. That's one of the ways out of the gilded cage. And as you read through the interviews and the transcripts, you see that people do these kind of snack prayers, little micro acknowledgements of God throughout the day, constantly paying attention to where God is being present and active. And it, like I said before, it almost sounds too small to matter, but the data shows that it's this daily moment by moment attentiveness to God that is one of the most powerful predictors. Mandy asks the question of herself, am I recognizing his fingerprints on everything I do? So it's more than setting aside time to pray. It's actually living a life of prayer. It is weaving in God into our everyday fabric of our life. Am I seeing God there? When 1 Thessalonians 5:17 talks about pray without ceasing, It's that kind of life that we're talking about here. It it may seem like a command that is almost impossible to follow literally, to pray without ceasing. But what the people that are spiritually healthy are doing is they're living a life in constant orientation toward God. And so for your pastoral care, this is a practice that you can encourage in almost anyone. You don't need to be a spiritual giant to start noticing God in His creation, to start giving thanks to God for good blessings that come your way, to thank Him even for the difficult things that shape you. This is something that everyone can do at all times. So that's one way out out of the cage is by constantly paying attention to God. The other one is by actively pursuing God in creation. Now again, we're not saying pursuing creation as God, but pursuing God in creation. Remember, Calvin calls creation the theatre of God's glory. And that is a statement of theology. The natural world is a place where the character and the presence of God are visible and available for those with eyes to see. And the people I interviewed were living that. As I said before, Muriel talked about staying in the bush and that being worshipped. Ryan talked about taking a bike ride to sit at a bench with nothing to do in order to be spending time with God. Bob calls this kind of slowing down into the environment as a sacramental thing. George talks about going for a swim in the sea so that he can be made vulnerable to himself so that God can speak. The environment plays a big part in the lives of believers, and a full half of the participants mentioned the environment unprompted. I didn't even ask them about this. It just emerged in their natural discussion. And so, as we saw before, the statistics back this up. Engagement with creation is a significant predictor of moving from the mid to the high tier of spiritual health. So it's not a luxury for the spiritually advanced, it's just an ordinary means of grace. And so if you're caring for someone who's plateaued or got stuck in the routines of Sunday and small group without any sense of forward movement, perhaps it's time to ask them when last they spent deliberate time in creation with the intention of being there with God. That question might open up something in people as they become vulnerable with themselves about who they are in light of the bigness of God. And the fifth theme is that all of this requires patience. These ordinary means of grace, the spiritual disciplines we talked about before, is a slow grind. William describes it as being faithful year in and year out. So a weekend retreat might be great. A program that runs for 6 weeks is often really helpful. But over the it's a long, decades-long grind often that really grows people into spiritual health. Ryan makes the same point different. He says you can't expect your health to increase if you don't put in any effort. It's kind of simple but profound. Spiritual growth is not automatic. We partner with or participate in what the Holy Spirit is doing over a long period of time. I think perhaps it's for this reason that Galatians chapter 6 verse 9 tells us that we should not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we don't give up. So there is a real harvest, but it comes not on our own timetable, but that of God. And that could be months or years away. Now, again, we want to be precise. Our spiritual participation in spiritual disciplines and these kinds of things are not, our sheer will isn't going to bring this about. We don't earn this. This is God working within us, and we participate in what He's already doing. So there's 5 themes, but they all tell one story when we put them together. The goal is Christlikeness. The obstacle is the very culture of the CRCA itself, so devoted to its theology and pure doctrine and good biblical teaching, which is great and golden. But because of that, it can so stifle the experience of being in God's presence and a real felt relationship with God, that it actually prevents some of that pursuit of the Christlike self. So to answer that, spiritually healthy people do one of 2 things. They spend a lot of time orienting themselves and carefully paying attention to what God is doing, and secondly, finding time to make time for God in creation, withdrawing from the world to spend time with Him. Finally, underneath all of this sits this current of long haul spiritual discipline. So everyday ordinary means of grace over a long period of time where God continues to shape the people in their head and in their heart. And so as pastoral carers, perhaps our job is to help people hold on to the gold of the gilded cage, but to leave the cage by pursuing God in these other ways. Again, time for discussion. Here, question 2 is perhaps the most important one. When you think about someone you care for, where do you see this 30 centimeter gap from head to heart? Question 3 then moves on towards action. How would you actually help someone bridge that? So let's pause and talk about that and think about that now.